Have you ever thought to yourself, no, I don't want an 8-foot tall flower in my backyard? Well, think again, because this guy right here is Joe Pye Weed. And by the end of the video today, I will have absolutely convinced you to plant him in your own backyard. It's August here in northern Michigan, and it's hard to drive just about anywhere without seeing these guys along roadsides, in ditches, in swamplands across the area. This is Joe Pye Weed. Specifically, this one behind me is Sweet Joe Pye Weed. This plant as a whole has so much going for it, and most of it you can't even see with your own eyes. So let's dive in a little deeper and talk more about Joe Pye. To really understand the ecological significance of Joe Pye Weed, we have to first understand the nuances between the different varieties of Joe Pye Weed. In Michigan, we have 3 native varieties of Joe Pye Weed: Sweet Joe Pye Weed, Spotted Joe Pye Weed, and Hollow Joe Pye Weed. Spotted Joe Pye Weed is the most common and widespread Joe Pye Weed species in Michigan, and for good reason. Growing between 4 and 7 feet tall, it thrives in moist meadows, rain gardens, stream banks, and other consistently moist soils. As you're driving along a creek or a ditch, this is most commonly the one that you'll see. Its large, dome-shaped clusters of dusty pink flowers become one of the busiest pollinator hotspots in the garden during late summer, attracting monarchs, swallowtails, native bees, bumblebees, hoverflies, and countless other beneficial insects. If you're looking for the best all-around Joe Pye Weed for both wildlife value and ornamental appeal, this is an excellent choice. Sweet Joe Pye Weed is the Joe Pye Weed that's featured in this video. It's perfectly adapted to woodland edges and partially shaded landscapes, making it a great option for gardeners who don't have full sun. It typically grows 4 to 7 feet tall, but as you can see in this video, can often get larger. It produces soft pink flower clusters that bloom from mid to late summer, providing an important nectar source when many other woodland plants have finished flowering. Its elegant form, broad leaves, and ability to thrive in dappled shade make it one of the most underutilized native perennials for shaded pollinator gardens. Hollow Joe Pye Weed is the largest of Michigan's native Joe Pye Weeds, often reaching 6 to 10 feet tall in rich, moist soils. Named for its hollow stems, this impressive native naturally grows in wetlands, floodplains, and moist prairies where it creates towering clouds of pink blooms that can be seen from an incredible distance. Those enormous flower clusters provide an abundance of nectar for butterflies, bees, and other pollinators during late summer, making it an outstanding choice for rain gardens, pond edges, and large naturalized landscapes where it has room to truly shine. And when I say truly shine, I mean more than what just meets the eye, because a lot of the value that Joe Pye Weed has to offer, you can't actually see with your own eyes. Starting with the roots. So beneath the soil of this plant here is an extensive fibrous root system that does a phenomenal job of holding soil in place and preventing erosion. And this is exceptionally important when we're talking about wet soil areas like marshes, floodplains, or wet prairies. This plant can really anchor down deep and can thrive in those consistently moist soils, holding that soil together and preventing washout and erosion during heavy rains or floods. When that water movement is slowed, water actually has the chance to absorb into the soil instead of washing it away, which means better soil health, better sediment control, and overall a healthier ecosystem surrounding your Joe Pye Weed plant. Now, the flowers of Joe Pye Weed are an obvious asset. These are so stunning, especially when they're in full bloom. This is not actually in full bloom yet. You can kind of see the feathery tips just starting right here in the middle, but when this is in truly full bloom, you're going to see a feather explosion at the top of this cluster here. These are obviously stunning to look at, but we're not the only ones that love them. Our pollinators are absolutely drawn to them, especially the butterflies. I noticed that swallowtail butterflies and monarchs alike tend to be my most frequent visitors to this Joe Pye Weed plant back here. Yes, Joe Pye Weed does support pollinators by providing them with nectar, but there's an important caveat to that, and that revolves around the bloom time of this plant. It's early August right now. This plant is not yet in full bloom, which means in a week or maybe 2 weeks, this will hit absolute peak bloom time, which means this is technically a fall blooming flower. And as we know from previous videos, fall bloom times are so important because it's a less common bloom time for a lot of native flowers. Most native flowers tend to bloom in midsummer. So when we have late bloomers like Joe Pye Weed, it's an ultra important late season nectar source that provides energy and sustenance for insects before they go into those winter months. This literally means the difference between life and death for these insects. So making sure that you have fall blooming or late season blooming flowers like Joe Pye Weed, goldenrod, or asters is such an important asset to have for the insects of your backyard. In addition to the timing of this nectar, the actual abundance of nectar is a really standout quality of the Joe Pye Weed plant as well. When you take a step back, you can see that there are a ton of blooms on this single plant. Yes, this is one single Joe Pye Weed plant behind me. So this has developed over the course of only 3 years into a plant that's nearly 8 feet tall and probably about 4 feet wide. I have 9 primary stems on this plant, and each stem has a main cluster of flowers plus these subsidiary clusters of flowers, all of which produce an abundance of nectar. So when insects come to visit this plant here, they get to land multiple times and collect nectar from multiple sources without even leaving this singular plant. That means expending the least amount of energy to collect the most amount of nectar, and your insects will really enjoy that. But nectar is only part of the story when it comes to the sustenance that Joe Pye Weed can provide. Caterpillars absolutely adore their leaves. A huge variety of native moth and butterfly caterpillars feed on the leaves of Joe Pye Weed. This provides sustenance for these caterpillars before they turn into their chrysalis and ultimately into their final form as a butterfly or a moth. And while sometimes seeing damage like this on your plants can make you feel bummed out, especially if you spent a lot of time on your native garden, when you take a step back and look at the greater picture, then you can understand that this is actually part of a living food web in your own backyard. You plant the plants, the insects eat the leaves, the flying insects take the nectar. This food web gets to continue on. Now, we love to talk about butterflies and moths. We obviously think they're beautiful and want to see more of them in our backyard, but what we fail to comment on frequently is the importance of their caterpillars. Caterpillars aren't a pest, despite the remnants that they leave behind. They are an essential food source for birds. Most of our backyard native songbirds, like chickadees or finches, rely almost entirely on soft-bodied insects to feed and raise their young. And by soft-bodied insects, I mean primarily caterpillars. Worms make up a small proportion of that, but caterpillars is the overwhelming majority of this food source that these birds rely on for their young. So not only are you helping to support caterpillars that will turn into moths and butterflies, but you're also helping to support caterpillars that will feed baby birds in your backyard. We've talked about the nectar source, we've talked about the leaves providing sustenance for caterpillars and caterpillars providing sustenance for other creatures in your backyard, but a little talked about fact when it comes to Joe Pye Weed is how important they are structurally. Obviously, this plant is substantial in size, so we're talking about stems that are 4, 7, sometimes 8 or 9 feet tall, depending on the conditions. And that's a huge structure made out of entirely organic material. And insects really utilize this structure. So here we have a broken stem of the Joe Pye Weed. This is not hollow Joe Pye Weed, so the inside of this does have a pulpy substance to it. But once this dies out, that pulpy substance is often hollowed out or will naturally disintegrate on its own. And bees like to hide in there. Bees and other insects, they really like to overwinter inside of these stems. Hollow Joe Pye Weed is actually a really cool variety because it does have a hollow stem. So when you would crack open a hollow Joe Pye Weed, this stem would be totally hollow on the inside. And that's so beneficial for overwintering insects because it gives them valuable habitat to overwinter in or hibernate in and stay safe during those winter months. And a lot of these stems are thick. So imagine just to hold up a 9-foot stem, this is the size of my thumb here, and that's a really thick, really rigid stem. So we're talking about some pretty large insects that can actually utilize these stems here to overwinter during those cold, snowy months, which we have a lot of those here in Michigan. And last, but certainly not least, because let's face it, we all want beautiful gardens. That's what got us into this in the first place, right? Joe Pye Weed is a stunning asset to your flower garden. And while I know it's kind of intimidating to add an 8-foot flower to your backyard, there's a lot of really creative ways that you can use this flower and still make it look like a lovely, organized part of your landscaped area. Now, this guy behind me, I just kind of tossed in the ground because we had him left over one year, but I am building an area out back that's super organized. I've really taken my time planning it out, and I actually have Joe Pye Weed as one of my centerpieces right in the middle. So I'm using it like I would use a large shrub or a small tree or even a tall grass, because I know that it's going to add that really nice structure and form right there in the middle. But in addition to that structure and form and beauty, it's also providing all of the benefits that we've talked about in our video today. And it just adds this unique edge that not a lot of other flower gardens have to offer. So if you're looking for a centerpiece in your landscape that will really stand out and be a talking point when guests come to visit, Joe Pye Weed is a really great option for that. Now, if you're on our channel, then you probably already are interested in native plants. And when we're native plant gardeners, we're gardening for a lot more than just beauty, right? We're here because our plants serve a purpose. They play an essential role in our backyard ecosystems, and we're eager to help grow that role of our backyards. We want our backyards to be as vibrant and alive as possible, and that goes way beyond just the plants that we choose and what they look like. Native plants don't just occupy space, they enrich the soil. Their flowers feed the insects. Their leaves feed the insects. Their insects feed the birds. Their seeds feed the birds. And their structure provides habitat for overwintering these insects and other small mammals. They go way beyond just providing a colorful burst of petals for a few weeks out of the year. They serve an essential role and an essential purpose that goes far beyond the bloom time of that plant. And Joe Pye Weed is certainly one of those flowers that is closer to the top of the list of ecological value because of all of the things that we talked about in the video today. So I'm going to end this video with a fun fact and a question that I actually had early on about Joe Pye Weed, and I have this question about a lot of native plants because I feel like they're unfairly named. But I wanted to know, why is Joe Pye Weed called Joe Pye Weed? Because as we all know, it's certainly not a weed. So I did a deeper dive on it, and it turns out that what is widely believed, and not quite proven, but widely believed, is that Joe Pye Weed actually got its name from an 18th century Mohican leader or healer named, and I'm going to put the name up here because the pronunciation is also questionable, Joseph Shawquethqueet. This Mohican leader, Joseph, he was really involved as a healer, and he knew a lot about herbal medicines. And the European settlers, not being able to pronounce his name, or perhaps not investing enough time into it, would just call him Joe Pye. He was associated with these herbal medicines, and it's likely that he probably used this plant in a lot of his herbal medicines. So over the years, it just kind of became associated with him and unanimous with him, and it was then dubbed Joe Pye Weed. So that's rumor on the street, unconfirmed. Highly doubt it will ever be confirmed, but if you were curious about where the name came about, that was the most talked about theory that a lot of people in the native plant community and indigenous communities had. That's all I had on our video today for Joe Pye Weed. Obviously, this is one of my favorite flowers, and this guy right here is just one of those plants that every single year I look at it and I'm just like, you are magnificent. I adore seeing huge native plants like this just take up space and structure and watch all the insects come and visit it. So I strongly encourage you to consider these larger native plants. I know it's intimidating sometimes to see a plant of this size and look for a space in your own backyard, but you'd be really surprised at just how well some of these larger native plants can integrate in with their surroundings, and they just bring such a unique look and so much value to your backyard ecosystem that you can't say no. Just a reminder, we still have our monthly newsletter. So once a month we send out a free newsletter. It's just native plant tips, some native gardening ideas, design ideas, and we like to highlight certain species like Joe Pye Weed behind me here. If you're interested in receiving this for free every month in your inbox, go ahead and sign up using the link above or down below in the description, and we'll get you added to our mailing list. We are also starting to do virtual landscape consulting specific to native plants. We've had several clients across the United States so far. It's been really fun to work with them on their different projects. So if you are looking at landscaping an area of your yard and would like some input from us and some of the methods that we use on our own designs, definitely head to our website. I'll drop the link above and below again, and you can fill out just a brief questionnaire form where I can learn more about your project and we can work together and decide if this is a good fit for our virtual consultation services. If you've been here before, then you've heard me say it, but spending time on our channel seriously helps out small businesses like ours so much. I sincerely appreciate all of the time that you spend here. Thank you so much for tuning in with us this time, and I sure hope to catch you next time around. Bye-bye.